A London silk hat maker whose factory burned down uninsured stepped off a ship at Port Adelaide in January 1849. He failed at the goldfields twice. In 1853, he opened a tin smithery on Toppin Street, Adelaide, with 4 men and a boy, making jam cans for the Glen Ewan Jam Factory. 133 years later, his family firm was producing 50% of every washing machine built in Australia. 4,000 workers, 2 factories. The empire survived 2 world wars, the Great Depression and the Whitlam tariff cuts. The family funded Cecil Madigan's expeditions. That is why it is called the Simpson Desert. Then, in September 2006, Trevor Carroll walked into an Adelaide press conference and announced that Electrolux would close the Adelaide factories and move production to Rayong, Thailand. The decision had been made in Stockholm. Before we go any further, hit like and subscribe. Every subscriber keeps these stories alive. Chapter 1. The Silk Hat Maker. Alfred. Simpson was born in London on the 29th of August, 1805, the second youngest of 12 children. His father, John Simpson, was described in the family records as a gentleman, which in Regency London was a word that means the family had standing, but not necessarily wealth. Alfred was apprenticed in 1820, at the age of 15, to the Worshipful Company of Tin Plate Workers. By 1829, he was a freeman of the City of London. He had done what a smart young man in Victorian England was supposed to do. He had a trade. He had his papers. He had a future. What happened next is either a family tradition or the single most dramatic biographical opening on this channel, depending on your tolerance for 19th century industrial disasters. Alfred Simpson opened a silk hat factory in Southwark, South London. According to the 1954 company, History Today Not Tomorrow, it became the 5th largest silk hat factory in the city. The Simpson brothers had gone to Paris to study the technique. The hats were made for the English gentry and exported across the empire. Then the factory burned down, uninsured, during the 1840s collapse of the English railway boom, when credit dried up and banks foreclosed on half the country. Alfred Simpson spent the next 7 years financially ruined before he could afford to marry his fiancée Sarah Neighbour, which he finally did on the 21st of June, 1838. They would not have much peace together in England. In 1849, Alfred Simpson boarded a ship called the John Woodhall, bound for Melbourne, and disembarked at Port Adelaide on the 17th of January. He was 43 years old. He had a wife back in England who would follow him. He had a tin plate trade and no capital. For 4 years he tried everything and nothing worked. He made 2 trips to the Victorian goldfields, while Sarah, who had joined him in Adelaide, gave piano lessons to keep them both fed. In March 1852, he sent her 20 ounces of gold from the diggings. That was the peak of his prospecting career. In 1853, on Toppin Street, Adelaide, Alfred Simpson opened a tin smithery. 4 men and a boy, pots and pans, jam cans for Glen Ewan. The Australian Dictionary of Biography describes him as of a retiring disposition, esteemed for his commercial ability and consideration to employees, a Yarnarian, active supporter of the Unitarian Church on Wakefield Street. A memorial window was installed there in his name after he died. He died on the 23rd of September, 1891, leaving a factory of 500 workers and 3 generations of sons who would turn his jam cans into the machine that washed every set of sheets in Australia. Chapter 2. From Jam Cans to an Empire. Alfred Muller Simon was born on the 4th of April, 1843. The founder's son, the second generation. Where Alfred Sr. had been retiring, Muller was public. Where the father had been slow, the son moved fast. He joined the firm as a 19-year-old apprentice in 1857. He became a partner in 1864 on his 21st birthday. and the company was renamed A. Simon and Son. He would run it for 49 years. In 1868, he opened a new factory at the corner of Gawler Place and Grenfell Street, in the heart of Adelaide. In 1871, he took over a former Congregational chapel in South Gawler Place. The workers nicknamed it Simpson's Black Angels, for reasons nobody wrote down. In 1876, he acquired an additional site on Pirie Street, where Simpson opened Australia's first porcelain enamelling works. In 1894, he moved the main operation to a 3-acre site on Wakefield Street that the press called 2 acres of roof. Here is the number that tells you the scale. By the time Alfred Sr. died in 1891, Simpson was the largest metal manufacturing plant in Australia. 500 workers across 3 Adelaide factories, a company founded by an unsuccessful gold prospector 4 decades earlier. The products reached deep into colonial life. Colonial ovens, gas stoves, bedsteads, japanned ware, the Adelaide patent fire and thief-proof safes, dynamite-resistant, installed in banks across the Australian colonies. And in 1885, the moment the pattern was set for everything that came later, the firm converted to war production for the first time. The Russian invasion scare had panicked the colonies. Muller's engineers built electrically detonated submarine mines from a technical manual to defend Port Adelaide from a war that never came. The capacity to convert fast from peacetime production to military production would define the firm through 2 real wars. Muller was also a politician. He served in the South Australian Legislative Council from 1887 to 1894, arguing for tariff protection that would give local manufacturers a chance against imported goods. In 1878, he attended the Paris exhibition and came home with an E.W. Bliss double-action press that revolutionised his sheet metal production. In 1898, he pioneered porcelain enamel, ware manufacturing in Australia, the technology that would eventually make Simpson stoves and washing machines possible. When he died on the 28th of September 1917, his estate was probated at £207,000 in Adelaide alone, plus $19,000 in Victoria and $3,000 in New South Wales. A fortune, one of the largest estates of any manufacturer in Australia at the time. By then, the firm had already converted again. The empire had gone to war, and a tin factory in Adelaide was making the mess tins, the water bottles and the trench periscopes that Australian soldiers carried across the Dardanelles and the Western Front. Chapter 3. The Soldier's Mess, Tin and the Desert. There is an object in the collection of Museums Victoria, item number 2,059,542. It is a D-shaped steel mess tin, the kind an Australian infantryman in 1916 would have carried in his pack. The bowl is stamped with 5 words: Simpson and Son, Eltade 1916, Adelaide. It is the tangible artefact that connects the Simpson family firm to the First World War. Steel, stamped, dated, traceable, was made at the Wakefield Street Works in the same year that Muller Simpson personally donated £2,250 to the Commonwealth, enough to buy a Royal Aircraft Factory FEA-2B fighter plane for the war effort. The First World War conversion was comprehensive: enamelled water bottles, mess tins, harnesses fittings, hospital boilers, mobile field kitchens, and a tranche periscope patented by Alfred Muller Simpson himself, which allowed Australian soldiers to look over the parapets of the Western Front without putting their heads above the line of German snipers. Australian soldiers carried Muller Simpson's inventions through Gallipoli, Pozieres and Passchendaele. That is not rhetorical flourish. That is a fact documented in the BRG 9 collection at the State Library of South Australia. Muller died in 1917, 8 months before the armistice. His son Alfred Allen Simpson took the chair. Allen was an Adelaide institution. He had been Mayor of Adelaide from 1913 to 1915. He would be awarded the CBE in 1918 and the CMG in 1935. He was the kind of chairman who funded civic projects and sat on every board worth sitting on. Here is the part of the Alan Simpson story that still astonishes me. Alan Simpson personally financed Cecil Madigan's 1929 Antarctic aerial survey and his 1939 camel expedition across the Great Australian Inland Desert. That is why it is called the Simpson Desert, not because any geographic feature suggested the name, but because Alan Simpson paid for the trip. And his family name is also on Cape Simpson in Antarctica, through Mawson's Australasian Antarctic expedition, which the Simpson family helped fund. An Adelaide white goods family has its name on 2 uninhabitable regions of the Australian continent and a section of the Antarctic coastline. Most Australians have no idea. Nobody teaches this in school. Alan Simpson died on the 27th of November 1939, 3 months after Australia declared war on Germany. His son Alfred Moxon Simpson stepped into the chairman's office. Moxon would be the 4th generation. His personal diaries, now archived at the State Library of South Australia as BRG 948, cover the years from 1930 to 2000 and form the inner record of the firm through its entire golden age. The factory converted for the Second War. This time the products were bigger. The workforce was larger. The war was much closer to home. And the scale of what came after the war, when a tin factory pivoted to white goods on a continental scale, would redefine Australian domestic life for 40 years. Chapter 4. The Post-War Washer. The Dudley Park factory opened somewhere between 1939 and 1946. The sources disagree. Electrolux's corporate history says production has been continuous at the site since 1946. Adelaide local histories place the first buildings at 1939 or 1940. The Moxon-Simpson diaries, still not fully transcribed in the public catalogue, would likely resolve the date. What is not in dispute is that Dudley Park became the site that carried the Simpson name through the rest of the 20th century. After the war, the firm made the most consequential pivot in its history. It stopped making tinware. It started making white goods. The first Simpson washing machine was produced in the 1940s, manufactured in Adelaide under licence from Maxwell Lutard of Canada. The Powerhouse Museum in Sydney holds one of them. Object number 72930, serial M49932. It has a ringer. It has a Simpson badge. It looks like what it is, the first generation of Australian-made domestic mechanisation, built with post-war optimism and wartime-grade steel. Alfred Moxon Simpson, ACCMG, was born on the 17th of November, 1910. He joined the firm in the 1930s. He became chairman after Alan's death in 1939, and he stayed as chairman for 26 years, until 1979. 55 years with the company. His diaries span the entire arc of the Golden Age. Moxon's era was when the washer became the spine of the business. In the 1950s, the firm launched the Simpsomatic, a semi-automatic washer with a ringer and a timer, the kind of machine that transformed Australian suburban life. The Simpson A40 came in the 1960s, the third-generation machine, the first to use what the marketing material called fluid drive, a torque converter borrowed directly from automotive transmission engineering. In 1963, the critical merger happened. Simpson combined with Pope Industries Lutard, the Adelaide manufacturer best known for garden sprinklers and electric motors. The combined entity was renamed Simpson Pope Holdings Lutard. Pope brought its Beverley factory, originally opened in 1935, into the Simpson family. Pope also brought Sydney Barton Pope's ruthless employment culture, which the Beverley workers still referred to in the 1970s as the Boy Farm, because pre-war Pope had hired 14 and 15-year-old juniors to avoid award wages. 2 families, 2 cultures, 1 consolidated empire. By the late 1970s, Simpson Pope had become the dominant washing machine manufacturer in Australia. The managing director was John Uhrig, a management thinker who championed what he called the Uhrig philosophy of worker management cooperation. Under Uhrig, the firm mechanised aggressively, invested in new product lines, and positioned itself as the survivor in a consolidating industry. And Moxon Simpson, watching from the chairman's office, had a simple message for the federal government in Canberra. Cut the tariffs. Let us compete. We can outproduce Hoover. We can outlast Kelvinator. The family that survived 2 world wars could survive trade liberalisation. Or so he believed. Chapter 5. The 50% Empire. The Tilley, Hudson, Evans. Whitegoods' report of April 1979 is the single most important document in understanding how large Simpson had become. Clive Hamilton's academic paper on capital and labour in the Australian whitegoods industry cites it directly. Simpson, Pope and Malleys, the merged entities, together produced approximately 50% of every washing machine manufactured in Australia. Hoover held 25 to 30%. Email and its Kelvinator subsidiary held roughly 5%. But here is the kicker: the retail data does not show. Simpson Pope also manufactured, under a confidential supply contract, 100% of every Kelvinator branded washer and dryer sold in Australia. Simpson Pope also produced 50 to 60% of every Australian-made clothes dryer. When you bought a washing machine in an Australian appliance store in 1978, there was a better than even chance that it had been built in Adelaide by a company your grandfather would have recognised as the old jam tin firm. The mechanisation at Beverley in the late 1970s is worth sitting with. By the end of 1979, 500 workers produced 1,200 washing machines per day at Beverley, up from 200 per day just 2 years earlier. The firm had invested $8.9 million in mechanisation, including a single gearbox line costing $1.3 million that replaced 18 machines running across 3 shifts. The product line in this era is a greatest hits list of Australian domestic appliances. The Fabulous 89, launched in 1973 with the tagline, "Solid State Control." The Enduro, the Esprit, the Easy Set, the Encore, the Silencio, the Aquapulse, the Maxidry, the Sirocco wall-mountable dryer range models 350, 450, 455 and 500. Every one of those names ended up in somebody's Australian laundry. The 1990s television campaign used the tagline, "The hardest working washers in the world." One surviving commercial shows a Simpson washer being tested in an outback oil field. An Australian washing machine, built for Australian conditions, advertised as tougher than anything else made anywhere. Here is the dark side that the marketing material never mentioned. At Pope, before 1945, Sydney Barton Pope had been known as one of the toughest businessmen in South Australia. Pope employed underage workers to avoid award wages. The Beverley site was nicknamed the Boy Farm. Pope bought his way to post-war respectability with bonus schemes that sometimes exceeded shareholder dividends, and by building an employees' recreation hall in 1953. But the culture remembered, and Simpson Pope was the only major Australian white goods manufacturer to publicly support tariff reductions in 1978. The firm believed, correctly, on the evidence available, that it could outcompete Hoover and Kelvinator on a level domestic playing field. What nobody in 1978 predicted was that the playing field would not stay domestic. Moxon Simpson retired as chairman in 1979. For the first time in 126 years, no Simpson name was on the managing director's office door. His son Anthony stepped into the acting MD chair. 7 years later, Anthony Simpson would sign the papers that ended the dynasty. Chapter 6. The Family Cells. In 1986, After 133 years of continuous Simpson family management, Anthony Simpson sold Simpson Holdings Limited to Email Limited of Sydney. That sentence compresses a structural decision that changed Australian manufacturing forever. Email Limited had spent the preceding 6 years becoming the national consolidator of the white goods industry. Email had acquired Kelvinator in 1980. Email had acquired McIlwraith Davey in 1984. Email had held the Westinghouse Australia licence since the late 1930s. Adding Simpson gave Email control of approximately 60% of every white goods unit manufactured in Australia. The industry had 4 or 5 major players entering the decade. By 1986, it had 1. Anthony Simpson personally oversaw the transaction. He was acting managing director. He had a Bachelor of Mechanical Engineering from the University of Adelaide and an MBA from Harvard Business School. He had been on the Simpson board since 1980. His decision to sell was not a hostile takeover, not a corporate raid, not a scandal. It was a reading of the economic weather. Here is what Anthony Simpson saw. The Whitlam government had cut tariffs 25% across the board in July 1973. The Industries Assistance Commission was pushing further reductions. The incoming Hawke government's button plan for textile and automotive industries signalled that white goods would be next. Simpson Pope itself had championed tariff reform in 1978. The capital required for the next wave of automation was enormous, and the family's 5th-generation stewardship had reached the point where selling at the peak means a fair price, while selling at the trough would mean nothing at all. The exact price paid by Email in 1986 is not in any publicly accessible source. The exact date in 1986 is not in the public record either. The 1986 Email Limited Annual Report, held at the National Library of Australia, likely contains both. For the purposes of this documentary, I can tell you that it happened. I cannot tell you what it cost. That ambiguity is not a failure of research. It is the record itself. On the shop floor at Beverley and Dudley Park, the day Email bought Simpson changed almost nothing. The Simpson brand stayed on the washing machine. The factories kept running. The workers kept clocking on. The Simpson name appeared on Email's balance sheet and disappeared from the Simpson family share register, but the product was still stamped Made in Adelaide. The Bannon Labor government of South Australia, in power from 1982 to 1992, oversaw the acquisition without documented public intervention. South Australia was in the middle of the state bank crisis that would eventually dominate Bannon's final years. A white goods family selling to a Sydney consolidator did not register in Spring Street. Email paid what Email paid. The Simpson family walked away with a generation's wealth and a clear conscience about the timing. And 15,000 kilometres away, in Stockholm, a Swedish company called Electrolux was running the numbers on every white goods manufacturer in the developed world. Chapter 7. The Stockholm Decision. The final pre-closure act of the Simpson story took 13 years to play out. Most of it happened in Europe. In April 1999, Email Limited bought Southcorp Appliances, consolidating the Hoover, Chef and Dishlex brands into Email's existing portfolio. By the turn of the millennium, Email controlled approximately 60% of the Australian white goods market, across almost every brand an Australian consumer would recognise. In 2000, Smorgon Steel Group Limited launched a cash takeover of Email. Smorgon wanted Email's steel distribution business. The appliances and electricity meter divisions were to be carved out and sold. On the 18th of January 2001, the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission cleared the takeover, with Chairman Professor Alan Fells stating publicly that the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission will not oppose the acquisition of Email Limited by the Smorgon Steel Group. On the 19th of February 2001, Electrolux AB of Sweden completed its purchase of email's major appliances division for approximately 485 million Australian dollars, 2.5 billion Swedish kronor. The announcement came from Electrolux CEO Michael Treschow. The acquired business had reported sales of $919 million in the financial year ending March 2000, an operating margin of 6% and 4,800 employees across Australia and New Zealand. The brands that changed hands that day included Simpson, Westinghouse, Kelvinator, Chef, Dishlex, Hoover and Frigidaire. In April 2002, Hans Ströberg became global CEO of Electrolux. He was born in Västervik, Sweden in 1957. He earned a Master of Science in Mechanical Engineering from Chalmers University in 1981. He joined Electrolux in 1983. He was 44 years old when he took the top job. Ströberg announced a global restructuring program. In his own later words, published on electroluxgroup.com and still accessible today, the target was to go from 20% of manufacturing in low-cost countries to 40%. That meant, in Ströberg's own list, closure of production in countries like Germany, France, US, Australia and Sweden, and opening of new plants in Poland, Hungary, Mexico and Thailand. Read that list again. Australia, named by the Swedish CEO, in the Swedish company's own published corporate history, 10 years before the closure it describes. Here is the thing about the Stockholm decision. Simpson was not unprofitable. The Adelaide factories were not failing. The product was not obsolete. What had happened was that the company that owned Simpson had been acquired by a company that had already decided at board level that Adelaide was on the wrong side of a global cost equation. The closure was a line item in a strategy document written before it was announced. The workers at Dudley Park, Beverley and Regency Park would hear the news in September 2006. Australia was on the list. Simpson was the sacrifice. Chapter 8. The Announcement. In September 2006, Trevor Carroll, Managing Director of Electrolux Home Products Australia and New Zealand, called a press conference in Adelaide. The announcement was that Electrolux would close two of its Adelaide plants, the Regency Park dishwasher factory and the Beverley washing machine factory, with approximately 500 jobs lost over 18 months. The company took a restructuring charge of 300 million Swedish kronor against its third quarter operating income. Carroll's prepared statement was a masterpiece of the corporate communications school of softening bad news. Electrolux is able to manufacture washers, dryers and dishwashers which are currently made here more cost-effectively in company factories in Europe and Southeast Asia, he said. He called the decision a last resort after exhaustive analysis of their international competitiveness. He emphasised that staggered closures and voluntary redundancies would minimise the impact and help staff plan their future. Carroll was simultaneously president of the Australian Industry Group from 2006 to 2008. The man representing Australian industry was the same man announcing the closure of one of Australia's oldest manufacturers. The scope was divided across the two plants. Regency Park had been producing dishwashers for 26 years, approximately 1.5 million units across its working life. The closure was scheduled for the end of April 2007. 79 staff remained at final closure. 24 transferred to other Electrolux sites. 6 transferred to Beverley. 39 took voluntary redundancy or retirement. Production moved to Solaro, Italy, and later to Poland. The final day at Regency Park was documented by Appliance Retailer magazine. The last dishwasher was an Electrolux E:9 600 ISC stainless steel integrated model. Retail price $1,250. It was presented to Margaret Anderson of the History Trust of South Australia. The plant production manager, John Rutherford, had turned 70 on closure week. He had stayed to the end. He handed over the last machine and he went home. Beverley was a year away, but the announcement had already told the Beverley workers their factory was next. 350 staff were put on notice. Production was scheduled to move to Rayong, Thailand. Here is the darkest note in this chapter. In 2004, the High Court had handed down its decision in Electrolux Home Products P2I Lutted v Australian Workers Union, a landmark industrial relations case about bargaining agent fees in enterprise agreements. The successor entity to Simpson Pope, the company that in 1978 had been run on John Uhrig's philosophy of worker management cooperation, had spent the previous 10 years fighting its own workers in the High Court. The Rann Labor government in South Australia was in its second term. The closures came 5 months after Rann's 2006 landslide re-election, 28 seats of 47. No specific rescue package for the Electrolux plants was announced. Industry support was redirected toward defence shipbuilding at Osborne and the Olympic Dam mining expansion. Regency Park shut in April 2007. 11 months later, they came for Beverley. Chapter 9. The Silent Washer. At the end of the first quarter of 2008, the Beverley factory closed, the Pope washer plant that had been running since 1935, the Simpson Pope washer plant since 1963, 45 years of continuous washing machine production on one site, 350 workers made redundant. The last Australian-made Simpson washer rolled off the Beverley line with no ceremony anybody documented, no farewell shift photograph, no press conference, no union rally outside the gates. The Australian Workers' Union had negotiated voluntary redundancies, full entitlements under the existing workplace agreement, outplacement services and financial advice. That was what the workers received. There was no ceremony because there was nothing left to mark. The factory that built half of Australia's washing machines in 1978 shut its line in 2008, and the industrial press barely covered it. Production moved to Rayong, Thailand, where Electrolux had built a new plant capable of producing more than 1 million washing machines per year at a fraction of the Adelaide labour cost. Thai wages at the time were approximately $2.50 Australian per hour. Australian wages at Beverley were 25 to 30. The arithmetic told the whole story. Electrolux sold the Beverley site and leased back a portion. The building became the Australian and New Zealand National Spare Parts Distribution Warehouse. 25,000 square metres, 22,000 active stock-keeping units, $16 million of inventory. The building that had manufactured machines became the building that supplied the parts to fix the machines the building had stopped making. Here is the environmental footnote. The official Electrolux press release did not mention. Since 2015, the Environmental Protection Authority of South Australia has been monitoring a trichloroethylene contamination plume beneath the old Beverley site. Decades of industrial degreaser use had leached into the groundwater and soil vapour. Mitigation systems have been installed in some neighbouring residential homes. The Simpson Pope industrial legacy in Adelaide now includes a groundwater plume that the state EPA cannot declare remediated. And Moxon Simpson, the fourth-generation chairman whose diaries sit in the State Library, who retired in 1979 at the peak of the firm who chaired Simpson through the war, the post-war period and the Golden Age, died on the 11th of November 2001. Aged 91, 4 months after the Electrolux deal closed, 6.5 years before the Adelaide factory he built shut its doors. He did not see the end. His son Anthony did. Anthony. Simpson has since spoken to the Burnside Historical Society about the 1986 sale, and in September 2021 published Revolution in the Home, a family history based on his father's diaries, as the Simpson family's final word on 133 years of manufacturing. Dudley Park was still running. Making washers? No, making ovens now. The Simpson brand had gone to Thailand. One building left of a dynasty. Chapter 10. The Last Factory Standing. In 2026, Simpson Avenue, Dudley Park, is still home to an active Electrolux cooking appliance factory. Approximately 450 workers produce around 350,000 ovens per year across 150 product types. The ovens carry Electrolux, Westinghouse, Chef and AEG badges. 1 in 3 Australian homes, the company's own marketing states, contains a cooking product built at Dudley Park. The workforce is culturally diverse. A significant proportion of the workers covered by the current enterprise agreement speak Vietnamese as their first language. An AMWU press release from April 2024 specifically noted the composition. Average tenure at the plant is approximately 20 years. Average age is 54. These are long-serving workers in a region where long-serving manufacturing jobs have almost disappeared. On the 25th of October 2013, 2 years after Stroberg's program had consumed Beverley and Regency Park, Electrolux announced the closure of its refrigerator plant at Orange, New South Wales. That plant had produced approximately 300,000 fridges per year. The last refrigerator rolled off the Orange line on the 15th of April 2016. The Australian Industrial Press called it Australia's last refrigerator factory. Stroberg's 20 to 40% low-cost manufacturing program was effectively complete. Dudley Park survived because ovens are harder to ship than washers. A washer is a self-contained unit that stacks well in a shipping container. An oven is a bulkier, more fragile, more customised product that benefits from manufacturing proximity to the retail market. That single piece of industrial engineering is the only reason Dudley Park is still open in 2026. In 2024, Electrolux invested $3.5 million in a world-first electric-powered enamelling furnace at Dudley Park, replacing the 1984 gas furnace with a system capable of processing 240 60-centimetre oven cavities per hour at approximately 70% less energy consumption. The plant also installed more than 8,000 rooftop solar panels generating 2.2 megawatts and received zero waste to landfill certification. But in April 2024, the workers went on strike. 3 separate strike actions on the 12th, the 15th and the 19th of April, plus a 4th impromptu walkout. The workers were seeking an 18% wage increase over 3 years. Electrolux offered 11%, less than the 14.5% it had offered at other Australian sites. The workers had received no wage increase since November 2022. The AMW's South Australian Assistant State Secretary, Stuart Gordon, represented the workforce. The Simpson brand itself is still on Australian retail shelves. The simpson.com.au website is active in 2026. Current range includes the Easy series, the Active series, top loaders from 5.5 to 9.5 kilograms, 3 front loaders, and 4 kilogram and 5 kilogram dryers. Positioning, quality kept simple. Every Simpson washer and dryer sold in Australia today is manufactured in Thailand. Stand at the corner of Simpson Avenue, Dudley Park today. Look at the plant. 450 people still work inside it. The sign says Electrolux. The Simpson name lives on a Thai-made washing machine in Harvey Norman, and nobody in Adelaide calls it theirs anymore. Chapter 11. The desert still carries the name. Stand at Simpson Avenue, Dudley Park, on an ordinary weekday morning in 2026. You can hear the plant before you see it. The low industrial hum of enamelling, the click and thud of an oven assembly line, the reverse alarm of a delivery truck backing into the loading bay. The workers are walking to their cars. They speak English and Vietnamese, and Italian and Greek. The sign on the building says Electrolux. 133 years of Simpson family ownership ended 40 years ago, and the Simpson name is not written anywhere on this building. There is no heritage listing for any Simpson building in South Australia, not on the State Heritage Register, not on the City of Adelaide Register. The original 1853 Topham Street tin smithery was demolished generations ago. The Gawler Place factory came down in 1956. The Wakefield Street works are gone. The Beverley washer plant is a spare parts warehouse. The Regency Park dishwasher plant sits empty. A 133-year dynasty produced not one protected physical site. Lesson 1. The family that sells at the peak is still the family that sold. In 1986, Simpson Pope was the market leader. Anthony Simpson was the acting managing director. He read the economic weather correctly. He sold to email at the top of the market, preserved the family's capital, and walked away with a clear conscience and a fair price. It was not a hostile takeover. It was not a raid. It was not a scandal. It was a fifth-generation heir recognising that the capital demands of the next phase exceeded what a family firm could sustain. Every successful Australian family business that ever sold told itself a version of this story. Most of those stories were correct. The problem is that once the family is gone, nobody owes the workers anything. Email bought a business. Email was bought by Electrolux. Electrolux bought a portfolio. And the workers at Beverley and Regency Park found out in September 2006 that the people who owned their factory now had a target in Stockholm that did not include them. Lesson 2. Global consolidation does not respect national history. Electrolux did not close Beverley because Beverley was failing. Beverley was producing 1,200 washing machines a day at the 1979 peak. Electrolux closed Beverley because Hans Straberg had a strategic target for the proportion of Electrolux manufacturing in low-cost countries, and Adelaide was on the wrong side of it. In Straberg's own published corporate history, Australia is named by name as a closure target, alongside Germany, France, the United States, and Sweden itself. That is the fact that should sit with every Australian worker in a multinational-owned factory today. The decision to close the factory you work in may have been made in a boardroom on another continent before you were offered the job. The announcement you receive may be the local execution of a strategy you never had a chance to influence. Trevor Carroll gave the press conference. Hans Straberg wrote the plan. Lesson 3. The desert still carries the name. Here is the thing about Simpson that no other story on this channel can offer. The geography of Australia carries the family's name. The Simpson Desert in Central Australia is called the Simpson Desert because Alan Simpson financed Cecil Madigan's expeditions in 1929 and 1939. Cape Simpson in Antarctica is called Cape Simpson because the family helped fund Mawson's Australasian Antarctic expedition. Those names are not going anywhere. They are on every atlas printed in Australia. They will be on every atlas printed in 100 years. The factories are not there. The factories in Gawler Place, in Wakefield Street, at Beverley, at Regency Park are gone. The one building still standing at Dudley Park makes ovens for a Swedish company. The Simpson brand on washing machines is imported from Thailand. The manufacturing dynasty that built the name is archived in the State Library of South Australia as BRG9. The desert still carries the name. The factory does not. A London silk hat maker stepped off the John Wood Hall at Port Adelaide in January 1849. He failed at the goldfields. He opened a tin smithery with 4 men and a boy. A century and a half later, his family name is on a desert, on a cape in Antarctica, on a brand of washing machines sold in Harvey Norman. The desert is still his. The factory is not. And the washing machine in the laundry was built in Rayong, Thailand. The name survives. The work does not.